So this is the fourth and the last in the series of four of webinars we're running on buildings and related matters. And I'm delighted this evening to have with us Kevin and James from Burkett's, our registrar, James, and our deputy registrar, Kevin. And I'm really grateful to both of you for giving up of your time on this evening. And I've been looking forward to this one all the way through the series. So thank you very much for coming. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Kevin, who will lead us through the evening. The talks usually, I haven't asked Kevin, but they're usually sort of half an hour, 40 minutes, whatever. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions and any comments that people want to make. And we usually try and finish within about the hour so that people can have some time before having to go to their beds. All right, so thank you very much. Kevin, thank you. Welcome to you and James, and I'll hand over to you, brother.
Great, thank you. I, as they say, will share my screen.
Yep. That looks great. I can see that, Kevin. That looks great.
You can see the screen in full, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening. James, of course, needs no introduction to all of you. I'm sure all of you know James, who is the registrar. And he's been the registrar for 20, is it nearly 20 years, James, or is it more than 20 years? I can't remember.
I'm afraid it's 26.
26, there you go.
Years.
I've been working with James for 3 years, and it's an utter delight. And he is helping me to help all of you, I hope. This evening, we thought we would concentrate on some property issues. But before that, this is the general blurb that I was given. So
yeah, sorry, we inflict this on everybody, Kevin. I do apologize. Yeah,
that's all right. No, you'll get these slides afterwards, and then you can, these sections give you a bit of outline. First of all, just a little bit about the registry role and who we are. So you might recall that the legal officers of the diocese are the Diocesan Registrar, James, and me as deputy. The other legal officer is the Diocesan Chancellor. Very relevant to some of these talks because, of course, he sits in the consistory court and determines faculties, and his deputy is Naomi. Burkett's, the law firm that both James and I work for, has held a registry for more than 26 years because, in fact, there was one of our partners was the registrar before James. We've turned into a relatively large law firm since then. And there's about 1,200 staff in 8 offices, 700 lawyers. There are only 3 of us, 3 lawyers in the ecclesiastical practice, but we are a strategic part of the firm. And one of the helpful things is that behind us stand a whole load of colleagues in lots of specialist areas, so that when James and I get stuck, we can go and ask questions, particularly in the property department, employment, charities, data protection. The work of the registry is wide and varied. I mean, it's difficult really to fathom the variety that there is really, but it's sort of anything that affects any of you, any of the PCCs, church wardens, churches, archdeacons, bishops. So there's lots of things. That's one of the reasons I love doing it, and I know that's what James enjoys as well. We work under something called the retainer. So the diocese retain us as the legal advisors to the diocese. And we're able to therefore give some advice to PCCs, church wardens, incumbents within that retainer. So one of the messages is definitely to pick up the phone to one of us. If you've got a legal question, we'll do what we can to help you. And if there's any extra legal fees, we will let you know in advance. There's a link there to our new microsite, Burkett's Ecclesiastical, where there's a wealth of knowledge and information and links and forms to all sorts of things, again, relevant to church wardens, PCC members and incumbents on marriage law, property, and the like. So I can commend that to you. The first topic, and what I think I'll do is conscious of wanting to finish on time, but particularly as it's a relatively small group, which is absolutely fine. We can have a bit more of an interactive discussion. We'll do each of these separately, and then we can have a bit of a discussion or any questions. We're going to do churchyards and boundary disputes. Then we're going to do the faculty jurisdiction. And then we're going to do sort of commercial uses of churches, churchyards, and church halls. So they're the three. So we're going to start with churchyards. First of all, and James, are you going to? How do you want to? Are you going to ask me?
I'm going to chip in
Yeah.
when I've got something that might be useful.
Good. Or if I say something wrong. So sometimes it's helpful to sort of start at the, go back a step and remind ourselves who is the legal owner of the churchyard. And if you're an incumbent on the call, then you are the legal owner of the churchyard. You're, of course, holding it on trust for the parishioners. So you can't sort of sell it off and have housing development built on it that you can then pocket the money, of course. You are the legal owner, but you can't do very much with the churchyard in that sense without a pastoral scheme.
Can I mention something that is quite topical at the moment, Kevin? When churches are applying for grants, they are often asked proof of ownership. And we can't provide that in Suffolk because our churches are not registered at the land registry and most of them don't have any title deeds. So the proof that I can offer that usually seems to do the trick is a form of sort of certificate that I can give you as the Diocesan Registrar that just says, as Diocesan Registrar, I certify that title to the church and churchyard is vested in the incumbent for the time being, who is for the moment whoever it is. So if you need one of them, just let me know. Thank you.
Relatedly, but unconnected to all of this, if any of you are doing registering with the Charity Commission, because you've got to register the PCC as a charity, there's also some helpful guidance we can give there, because with the charity, it's a similar sort of thing. Charity Commission application will sort of ask you for your constitution, which is within different measures. But if that applies to you, then do get in touch. We can point you in the right directions. Burials. So if your churchyard is open for burial, you will probably know that parishioners have a right to be buried in the churchyard. As I say, that's if it is open, and that extends to if somebody dies within your parish. Anyone else, it would be at the discretion of the incumbent. That's sort of part of the package, really, that is the establishment of the Church of England, and it has some knock-on consequences which we'll talk about, particularly on transferring of maintenance obligations. That's really one of the reasons why, is that anybody, they don't have to be Christian, they don't have to be baptized, can be buried in the churchyard. Churchyards are subject to the faculty jurisdiction. Probably many of you know what that means broadly. It means if you want to do anything, then you need a faculty, which is a permission from the Chancellor. And in particular with in churchyards and burials, that means that a memorial needs the permission of the Chancellor. Now, what the Chancellor in pretty much every diocese where there are open churchyards has done is produce something called the churchyard regulations. You may be familiar with those. And that really is a sort of a delegation to the incumbent that, provided that the memorial meets the details in the churchyard regulations, then it's okay for the incumbent to approve that.
We call them in Suffolk. We call them churchyard rules.
Sorry,
they've recently been revised, and we have made available on laminated bits of A4. Every parish should have one in the most up-to-date version.
Can I just say they do, and can we thank Burkett's for their generosity in doing that? Rich and I were both very grateful. At the end of this little session, we'll be very grateful for some advice. One of the problems is they now stretch to 4 sides of A4, and we're struggling to put them onto notice boards. And we wanted to ask you tonight whether you can do summaries, or can you do partial, or have you got some suggestion where we might stick them? And please keep it decent. But we don't want to sound ungrateful, but 4 sides of A4 has proved a little bit challenging space-wise.
I think the answer, David, is that you've got to have the whole thing.
Right.
I think it's
Yeah.
dangerous to try and summarize. Uh,
Yeah.
I experimented in trying to do 2 bits of A3 and 4 bits of A4 or whatever it was, and it was the 4 bits of A4 that seemed best.
Yes, absolutely.
But what I think we all need to realise is that, unbeknown to me, while we were doing this revision, the diocesan chancellors across the country have got their heads together and have come up with what they want to be a uniform set of
Right.
rules or regulations that is going to apply to everybody everywhere.
Right.
And they've come out to diocese, and they will come out to diocese, probably through the registrars, with a sort of a request that we see what we make of them.
Yeah, I saw it in the Church Times a little bit about that, I think. And okay, thank you. I don't want to cut across your talk, Kevin.
No,
But
that's all right.
Yeah.
And actually, I can't do. I've only got 2 screens, so at the end, I'm going to put a whole load of web links into the chat, and one of them is a link to the churchyard rules. But there's some other links as we'll go through. But I can't. I'm afraid I can't do 2 things at once. So please excuse me. Next, we might just talk about closed churchyards. There may be a combination amongst the audience. Some are open, some are closed. Interesting to note, in London, where I'm also deputy, in the whole of London, there are only 2 open churchyards. Therefore, they have no churchyard regulations because they just don't need them. Anyway, when your churchyard is full, you can apply to have it closed by an order in council, which is, we were hearing about yesterday, for reasons I will explain in a second, is literally a meeting of the Privy Council to close a churchyard. But you can get that order in council. That means the churchyard is closed. Importantly, it cannot be reopened. There is no mechanism for reopening. And what that means is it's closed for all future burials, unless the order says otherwise. But it might, for example, talk about family plots, and it might still allow family members to still be buried, and it might say something about interment of ashes as well. If it doesn't say anything about interment of ashes, then you can still get a faculty to inter ashes in a closed churchyard, and that might be, sort of 1 by 1, or you might apply for some sort of faculty for a garden of remembrance. The reason why we were talking about the particularly Privy Council yesterday, James and I were at the annual shindig of all the Diocesan Registrars across the country, and somebody came to talk to us from the Law Commission, and who knew that they are doing a consultation on burials and churchyards at the moment. I will send you, that's one of the links as well, that if you've got views, then that please send them in. One of the areas that they're consulting on is, for closing a churchyard, do you really need an order in council? Probably not. And I think they're recommending that it would be an order from the Secretary of State.
If anybody wants to have a question afterwards about what it means when is a churchyard full, is a question that I've had from time to time, as have archdeacons, and we can discuss that if you wish, but it may not be relevant to everybody, so we'll see.
And there's actually a linked issue about reusing the churchyards as well for reburials, which sort of goes down a very particular path. So we won't sort of talk about that now, but that is an option, and there are various. In fact, the Law Commission are consulting on that as well, not for consecrated churchyards, because they feel that we understand what we're doing in the Church of England, but for sort of secular and local authority churchyards. Again, one of the relevancies of closing a churchyard is that then you can transfer maintenance obligations under Section 215 of the Local Government Act 1972 to the district. I think it goes first of all to the district council, but depends what structures you have. They can then pass it on, and it one way or another gets to the local authority. There is an expectation that it's at least handed over in good order, and I'll copy you a link to something called Legal Advisory Commission, which is a sort of a Church of England version of the Law Commission, really, opinion about what that means in terms of getting the local authority to maintain the churchyard. I think James will probably have a word in a minute about some practical examples of that, but it's unlikely to be to the same standard of maintenance that a PCC were keeping it in. I think the rules say that it needs to be in decent order, and also to do the necessary repairs of walls and other fences. And there's some authority that's quoted that says that should be that it is kept in a decent and fitting manner, that is, to be cleared of all rubbish, muck, thorns, briars, shrubs, and anything else that may annoy parishioners when they come into it. So sort of somewhat helpful. But it's a tricky balancing act, really. But you don't need me to tell you that local authorities are not overly resourced at the moment, and therefore probably if they send someone around to cut the grass twice a year, they probably think they're doing a decent job. But James, have you?
That's the problem, and it's a two-edged sword. It's a two-edged sword transferring maintenance responsibility to the local authority, because although you have an element of control over it, it's still your churchyard, it's still subject to faculty jurisdiction. They will only do what their budget allows. And if, for example, you have a flint wall, churchyard wall, and it falls down, as they do, it will be years before you can get the local authority to repair it. It is the local authority's responsibility to do so, but you will have to exert an awful lot of pressure over a long time to get there. And you will also could find that your parishioners who were used to a nicely cut grass every couple of weeks, it goes to twice a year. The churchyard very soon you'll start getting complaints, and they'll come to you, but it's the local authority that is doing the work, so it can be tricky.
And then the last subject here on churchyards was boundary disputes, which I'm going to, in a cricketing metaphor, hit over to James.
That's fine.
Clear the boundary.
Boundary disputes are not covered by the retainer. So if you want Birketts to engage in a boundary dispute, it'll be at your cost. So I don't recommend it. But there are certain general things that you can perhaps try and do before it comes to that. The boundary dispute is usually about who is responsible for a particular boundary structure. It's not so much where is the boundary, in my experience. There might be a bit of, where is it precisely? Is it this side of a ditch or that side of a ditch? But it's usually to do with who's responsible for the ditch, for clearing it out, cutting the hedge, for mending the wall. And I have a few assumptions that I sort of start with. You can find a map fairly easily on the Land Registry's website, free, and that will show you what is registered and what isn't. And what isn't is usually your churchyard, and what is the neighbour. And that's a good guide to where the boundary is running. And another good guide to whose boundary structure that is, does it belong to you or does it belong to the neighbour, is that usually the church was there first, and churches from time immemorial have had a duty under canon law to enclose their churchyards. So usually, if you've got a churchyard boundary structure, most usually it's a wall, and if it's all of the same sort of method of construction all the way round, it's your wall. It must be, because your predecessors put it up to enclose the churchyard in accordance with their duty. If, on the other hand, you've got a bit of a hodgepodge of things, and you might, for example, be next door to a big landed estate, and the landed estate is also enclosed by a wall, and one bit of wall is built like the rest of the estate's wall, and the other bits of wall are built like your churchyard wall, then it's probably that section built like the estate's belongs to the estate. And those are the sort of general presumptions that I will offer you if you come to me for a bit of advice about all of that. And then I sort of hope that in most cases something can be worked out with the neighbour without the need to go to law. And it does no harm to explain to the neighbour that you haven't got any title deeds because you're a medieval church. It does no harm to invite the neighbour to show you his title deeds. And quite often that when he looks at them, he realizes that he's probably wrong in what he's been asserting. And these things can often, thank goodness, get sorted out.
Thank you, James. So that's the end of part one. Any immediate questions or comments or thoughts before we move on to the faculty jurisdiction?
So, folks, you are muted. If you want to ask a question, you need to unmute. It'd be really helpful if you could use the yellow hands sign so we can see you. If you can't work the yellow hand button, just wave frantically, and I can see you all. So, are there any questions for Kevin and James at this stage?
Helen,
Helen, are you? No. If you've got your screen blanked, obviously I can't see you. So if you want to ask a question, you're going to have to show us your face. That's the price you pay. Okay.
can I just amplify what relating to burials and churchyard regulations? And one of you needs to be talking to me fairly soon about a particular burial and a memorial on that grave. There is this right of a parishioner to be buried in the churchyard, but it's not in a place of their choosing, it's in a place of your choosing. And it only arises when they die. And that's why in some churches there has developed a sort of practice amongst local people of trying to book themselves a particular spot in advance of their death, either because they want a particular spot because it's next to granny, or because they're worried that the churchyard is going to be full and there won't be space for them when their time comes. And the way they book their space is by applying for a faculty. And churches, PCCs, don't have to agree to the faculty. They don't have a veto, but they can express strong disapproval with the principle of people booking their slots by reserving a grave space. And I don't think enough PCCs are aware of that. And they think that once somebody applies, it's more or less a foregone conclusion that they're going to get it. It isn't. So if you don't want the idea of people jumping the queue, you don't have to approve their applications.
James, if you don't approve their application, what happens then?
It will go to the chance. It will go along with anybody else's views to the Chancellor, and on the basis of what he hears, and he will make a decision.
And they all go to the Chancellor, not just the ones that the PCC don't approve of. But
okay.
They all go.
Thank you. Now, Nicola has raised her hand. Well done, Nicola.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Being a new incumbent, I've been taken round various churchyards, and there is one church that I'm responsible for where the land was recently, and I don't know how long ago, whether recent is 10 years or 2 years or, longer ago than 10, where the land was given over to the church because it was allotments. And so we now have this large portion of land, but there is no boundary between the edge of the church property and the back gardens it backs onto. And I was wondering whether there is any point, or whether there is a need that we fence it or make some barrier between the church property and the neighbours' back gardens?
Yes, definitely. I'm almost about to say you must.
Right.
And perhaps come back to me separately, Nicola, and tell
Yeah.
me where it is.
I
But
will.
if it has not yet been consecrated, it will not be consecrated until it has been fenced.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. And I also have an issue of a car parked on it as well. But
Right. Let's have a conversation separately.
thank you very much. Thank you.
So moving
Which is why fencing helps, because then obviously it's harder for cars to get
yes.
on.
Yes, indeed. You haven't seen the driving in Suffolk, Kevin. So Helen Grover. Helen, all we can see is the top of your head.
I don't know why.
You're also sinking. You see, is
that better? That's
yes.
right.
Right. Far away.
Visited quite a few churches where we have got lots of reserved grave spaces with the grounds saying they're reserved, but I have no paperwork and I don't know who they belong to. Is there a list that's kept anywhere, or
Angie Long, who's on that list at the beginning, who's worked for the diocese for Burkitt's even longer than I have. This is her favourite subject.
Oh.
And she can and will, because she's so willing, she can go back through the records and look at every faculty that reserved a grave space for a parish in sort of the last 50 years, and she can often find enough details to be able to tell you at least who it is and maybe where it is.
Lovely. Okay.
It is a real pain in the neck doing it.
Yes.
Every time we issue a faculty to somebody for their grave space, we physically send a copy. It used to be physical, now it's email. We send a copy to the parish as well, and we say to the parish, stick this in your churchyard map or whatever you use to allocate grave spaces.
Yeah.
I
There's no record.
I was going to mention churchyard plans or maps because, again, definitely have one. Marking out where burials have taken place. But if you don't have one, then at least start one as soon as you can, because that will become very beneficial at various points in the future when you don't know who is where or what remains are where.
Sometimes, Helen, you can find somebody in the benefice for whom making the map is actually a source of pleasure. And, some people have got that sort of mind. So if you can find somebody who's willing to do you a map, even if it's starting, even ideally you would have started 50 years ago, but start now. And at least you've got cohesion moving forward. Clarity, that's what I'm looking for, moving forward. Is that all right?
Thank you. Yeah.
The good news is it's only 50 quid a search from Burkitt, so yeah, that's all. Yeah. Can I move us on to?
Is that the discounted rate?
Yeah, that's their friends rate. If I just move you on, I think just conscious of time a little bit. May I move us on to section number 2? Is that all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You may,
Thank
absolutely,
you.
yeah. So can you see faculty jurisdiction? Good. So just again, as a refresher, faculty is a permission granted by the consistory court of the diocese for work to be carried out to consecrated buildings and land, and it will usually include churchyards, and don't forget this bit, fixtures and fittings and furnishings within the church as well. So it does apply to some of that stuff as well. It's not just necessarily the buildings. The jurisdiction is normally exercised by the Chancellor, Justin Gow, as I was saying, or in some cases, specified matters by the appropriate Archdeacon, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. A faculty is required for any work affecting consecrated land, including repairs to buildings, alterations or additions, sales or other disposals of consecrated land or chattel, so things. And it's worth noting that if property is sold without a faculty having been obtained, the buyer will not obtain good title to the property sold, so they may have recourse back to the PCC because they might not have legal title in it. Why is if you're not on mute, as soon as I said faculty jurisdiction, I probably would have heard an audible groan across everybody, because the faculty jurisdiction applying for faculties does get a bit of a bad press. So why is it important? We would say first and foremost, it's to protect the church buildings. It is there so that people can't go around doing things without it having been considered. Particularly in Suffolk, you have a lot of historic building, grade 1, grade 2 listed buildings, and it's right that there's a Diocesan advisory committee and experts that judge whether or not, or advise rather, whether or not that's the right thing to be doing. It also protects those looking after church buildings as well. Actually, it does protect church wardens, PCC members, and incumbents, because if you want to do something, but by the time you've gone through all the rigmarole of a faculty, then that you've got good people on your side who are advising on the best thing to do. And the other reason, which I think is sometimes lost a little, is that you might think the faculty jurisdiction sometimes can be frustrating, but the alternative would be getting consent from the listed building, getting a listed building consent through the local authority. We have something called the ecclesiastical exemption, it's sort of referred to, and what that means is an exemption from listed building consent, provided that the faculty has been granted. And this is from a judgment I'm reading. It's predicated upon there being an equally rigorous system being maintained for the regulation of alteration to such listed buildings. I'm afraid we all know that there's a lot of people in secular society who would love the Church of England not to have some of the privileges that I would say the privileges that we have, perhaps around marrying people in our churches, or being able to decide things on our own. So I think it is incumbent on all of us that we make the best of it. But it is there for I would say for a series of good reasons. James, any comment on that?
That's exactly right. It was negotiated by Archbishop Randall Davison in the 1920s, I believe, and he sort of wrung this concession out of the government when it was bringing in listed building stuff, and we've got to hang on to it. And the way to hang on to it is to demonstrate to the world that we operate it properly and that it works.
So that's why it's important. Do I need a faculty for everything? No, I slightly alluded to this earlier, saying that the Archdeacon have some role in this, and in fact incumbents do as well. So you might be familiar with the faculty jurisdiction rules. They are the whole set of rules that apply here. And at the back of those, there's something called Lists A and List B. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with those, but just a reminder, List A are things that an incumbent or priest in charge can do on their own, provided they meet the list is divided into two columns. So there's the column of what you can do, and then there's a column of what conditions may apply. So if you can go down List A and whatever you want to do is on there, then that's great, you can do it. List B is where you need to go and seek the Archdeacon's consent for that. And again, something in the first column says what it can be, and then any conditions in the second column. And if you look through List A and B, there is that the law office at Church House do try and extend that as much as they can. They do listen, they do consult. Things are added on a fairly regular basis, to keep up with changing times, etc. So do have a look through there. Make sure you're looking at version. I find it very difficult, quite honestly, sometimes to locate the correct version. In the chat I managed, while James was talking, very cleverly cut and paste all of those links. So you might just literally lift them from the chat and stick them in an email or a document. But there is a link there to the faculty jurisdiction rules, a consolidated version which Church House produced, and that brings it right up to date to May, I think, of 2024, particularly around the updates recently have been around fossil fuel boilers. and contested heritage, moving things out because in certain groups within the church, may be offended by certain aspects of it. So make sure that you look at the correct version. Assistance, is there any assistance? I would say yes, there's loads of assistance to get you through the faculty jurisdiction and what you need to do. The diocese, Edmund, I've forgotten his surname, James Harris.
Harris.
Yeah, who's called the DAC secretary, and his team can help. Rural deans, archdeacons, the registry, the resource I put on there to the Burkitt's microsite. Actually the Church of England website around here is quite helpful. There's lots of stuff and guidance. So I know it can be a daunting task if you're setting off, particularly if it's a major building project or you want to remove something. But if in doubt, please ask, and there's a whole load of people that can assist. The online faculty system is basically the system that allows you to apply for a faculty. Again, there's a link to the online faculty system, and it means rather than pushing bits of paper around, or even emailing stuff, you sort of upload stuff onto online faculty system, and that has a workflow engine at the back which fires it off to the various bodies that need to approve things. Again, yesterday at our registrar's shindig, we heard from the person who has designed that, or certainly been working on the design, and I think this is good news. Don't groan. There is a new version of the online faculty system coming next year, and it's all new and all improved. And again, they really have invested quite a lot of time and money in it. This is the Church House and Church Commissioners in trying to make it certainly more user-friendly and to streamline the process. Training will be available next year for all relevant people, most notably archdeacons as well as registrars, because they're very involved in it. And that will be, I think they were saying that will be the training they're starting actually in the first quarter. In fact, I think an invite went out today to certain groups of people. DAC secretaries actually, I think, got their invites today to training in sort of January and February, and I think it's coming basically in the spring. And then what happens if you do something and then you realize afterwards you should have got a faculty? It can be tricky. There is something called a confirmatory faculty, and that's where you go with your head low to the Chancellor and say, really sorry, but we did something and we need a faculty. Can you give us one? And the Chancellor will have a look at that, and he or she will decide. Beware, Chancellors don't like having to give confirmatory faculties. I think they generally don't mind if it is a really genuine error, but if they feel that people have just carried on, regardless of the faculty jurisdiction, then they don't have to order. They don't have to give the confirmatory faculty, and they can actually order that everything is undone. You might have seen a case in London a few years ago at St Mary's Primrose Hill, where the PCC, excuse me, the PCC changed a whole load of chairs without a faculty, and the Chancellor did grant a confirmatory faculty, but he didn't like a certain colour, and those ones had to be removed. And I think it made it into the Daily Telegraph. So again, the lesson is, ask in advance. Because it might be that the PCC have to end up, putting work back at cost if they've done something that they shouldn't have done. Again, it goes back to, why is the faculty jurisdiction important? We need to be demonstrating that we're observing what the original aims for the ecclesiastical exemption were.
Can
James?
I make a couple of comments? We have a really good track record in Edmondsbury and Ipswich. We don't have consistory courts. We don't have people who have done things without permission and then have found themselves having to pay to put it right. Please, let's continue that. And there are so many people wanting to help you that there is really no excuse for not using the system. And just to give you an example of how much will help you, if I'm aware of a borderline case that maybe a list A, maybe a list B, may just have been forgotten, but should be a list A or a list B, I will go straight to the Chancellor with it and more or less say to him, look, please, will you approve this? And we often do that without any things being filled in at all. Similarly, if you find that, for example, I don't know whether anybody did suffer this in Stormbert, but Framsden Church, a church near me, have a serious, I think they've discovered something really nasty in the roof, and they want to put some emergency tarpaulin or sheeting on it and scaffold it and all sorts of stuff, and they can't wait. But rather than just go ahead and hope somebody will approve it later, they've wisely come to Edmund Harris, who's come to me, and I hope that I will get an approval from the Chancellor with a couple of emails, and it'll just be done. So we do have ways of helping you over these tricky bits of the faculty jurisdiction where you're playing your part. But if you don't play your part, I'm afraid the system has got no alternatively but to come down on you with a rather heavy hand.
Thank you, James. That's really helpful. And Rich and I would both be very grateful if we could keep consistory courts to a minimum. So are there any questions or comments for Kevin or James about this section? Sharon Potter.
So I know we don't want to go to a consistory court, but what happens at a consistory court?
Ooh.
Well, James can tell you this because he actually had one.
Well, we met here. The most recent one we've had was in Orford, and what had happened was that the PCC had made an application for a faculty to change its heating and lighting system and to move from an oil-fired boiler to electric-powered Coronas that also combined with lights, and they were overhead. And it was all on track to get approval. It had been recommended by the DAC, and unfortunately, and the public notices had been up, and unfortunately, the PCC were so worried about a cold winter, this was in November or December a few years ago, that they went ahead before the public notices had come down and the faculty had actually been issued. And they were found out by a local person in Orford who alerted me. So no faculty was issued, and this local person lodged an objection, and it went therefore to a consistory court hearing. There was about a year's worth of toing and froing and preparing of papers, cases, and arguments, and evidence statements and expert witnesses and all of that stuff. And the two sides, the PCC and the objector, each had their turn in the church in front of the Chancellor in a public hearing to argue their case and to cross-examine each other. And all of that took the whole of a morning. And the Chancellor then went away and wrote a judgment. And in fact, the judgment did grant the faculty on condition that the various amendments were made to the wiring, which was a bit sort of shabby. And there was also an order made against the PCC that the PCC pay all the legal costs of me and the Chancellor, which ran into some thousands of pounds. So that is what can sometimes happen if you have a contested faculty case, or if there is a case that needs to go in front of the Chancellor with a hearing because the Chancellor wants to see the church and feels that he needs to hear arguments about it.
Thank you, James. That's really helpful.
And it's interesting what you picked up there, that the consistory court takes place in the church. That is the consistory. There's not like a different building, you know. It's not like everyone goes somewhere. The consistory court is in that church where it's being decided.
I have to say, from personal experience, my case was quite a long time ago, and James was also there, different chancellor. It is an intimidating experience. It's not. There were no laughs, and I think the respondent and the defendant were quite humbled by the experience. It's not one I'd want to repeat in a hurry, I have to say. And I was on the side of the angels that day, and I still found it quite a moment. Yeah, and that cost the PCC several £1,000s as well, actually, I have to say. So on that
To lighten the mood.
On that happy note, let's now do number 3. Kevin.
To lighten the mood, somewhat really, this can be good. This is commercial uses for churches, churchyards, and church halls, and I appreciate that not every church will be able to make commercial use of their buildings, but again, in the straitened times we find ourselves in, and in lots of communities where community space is difficult to get hold of, it can be a way both to raise some money and also to further the ministry and mission of the church. So again, start with who owns what. So we talked about churchyards, that's held by the incumbent. Same with churches. You probably all know that the church hall, if you look up the title, you will see that the DBF, the Diocesan Board of Finance, is the legal owner of the church, of your church hall. So does that mean that if you rent out the church hall, they get the fees? Of course not. You'll be pleased to hear. It's by virtue of a piece of legislation called the Parochial Church Powers Measure 1956, which is sort of the constitution we were talking earlier about. I mentioned earlier, if you apply for Charity Commission regulation, that's sort of the constitution for the PCC. And within there, in section 6, it says that a PCC can't hold property, the legal title to property. They have the beneficial title, and that is just what it sounds like. You have all the benefits, and you could say the burdens of the property. It's just a case of who is the legal owner on the deeds or at the land registry. So don't be alarmed if you do see that on the deeds for the church hall. It is still for the benefit of the PCC. One use, as we know, a very common use for bits of church building. Whoops, sorry. Is for creches, nursery schools, and playgroups. That can be great. It can be a really good regular source of income. They tend to want to come in at times that you might not want to be in any of the various buildings, and it can be very good, lucrative exercise. I would absolutely more than caution, implore you to make sure that you have a proper agreement in those circumstances. I would say that if not every week, then most weeks, in one of the 4 dioceses that we work across, we might get a phone call from a PCC who have decided that it's no longer appropriate to have a certain group in, and it can cause huge problems if there is not a legal agreement in place that makes it clear what the rights and obligations are, and what we call the security of tenure, whether or not they can be asked to leave. So absolutely, please think about a proper agreement. Leases can be granted under the mission and pastoral measure. If it's the church, it can only be part of the church, and public worship must remain, as you might imagine, the primary use. And if you do it that way and get a faculty, that's in a way sort of a different type of faculty. It's still a faculty, but it's not quite the same. You have to get the views of the Victorian Society, but then they won't have what's called security of tenure. In other words, a sort of a protected tenancy. You might have heard it called under the Landlord and Tenant Act. But then you also need to think about, safeguarding obligations, whether you might need planning permission, and insurances and the like. So if you're going to go down that route, having those groups in please do, I would say, ask some questions, come and speak to us. Also, remember that all PCCs are charities, therefore you're also subject to the Charity Act and charity law, and the property you hold is therefore charity property, and there's a whole load of provisions in the Charity Act which apply. Largely, if you're going to sell some land, or if you're going to grant a lease for more than 7 years, again, ask us, because you need something called a designated advisor's report. That's a sort of a surveyor giving you assurances that what you're getting for that property, either sale proceeds or rent, is commercial and reasonable in the circumstances. So that's a little bit around that. Other churches, you may have other Christian denominations who might be a good idea to use the church. Again, in London, we have lots of, for example, Polish churches who use a church on a Sunday afternoon. That's sort of their regular time of worship. More, I think, there. And, again, it's both an ecumenical advantage and reaching out to other Christian churches, and it might also bring in some money. Again, seek early advice from your archdeacon if you're going to go down that route, because there are some rules that need to apply. You might need a written approval from the bishop, and it can get quite complicated quite quickly. There's a link in one of the links is to a Churches Together in England website, which is an ecumenical website, and again has quite a lot of guidance around how you would do that. Another use of church property might be for plays, concerts, exhibitions. Again, generally that's good. It gets different people in doing different things. Particularly for clergy amongst you, do remember canons F15 and F16. F15 talks about the church must not be profaned, and canon F16 says that plays and concerts must be consonant with sound doctrine and make for the edifying of the people. So just think about what's going in and make sure that it's basically in keeping.
Kevin, you and I are not the censors, so just
no, it's absolutely it's in common. And again, speak to your archdeacon if you're concerned about that. And then another money spinner. If you have a beautiful rural church in Suffolk, it might be filming. So filming rights, churches can make a fair amount of money for filming. Again, be careful. Not every film will be appropriate to be filmed in a church, and really should be looking at two things. One is the action that is happening in your church or your churchyard, but also you will want to know what's happening in the overall plot of the film or the TV show. So we had one in my church down the road here for Midsummer Murders. So we did just double check that there wasn't some sort of gruesome murdering of a vicar or something like that, and there wasn't. So we made, I think, £2,500 for half a day's filming. It was just a moped driving through the churchyard, but we had an agreement in place and made sure that was all sorted out. And then finally, other secular groups, and the 2 points here, one around that, and also a whole hire policy. Quite often get asked about yoga in particular. Is it okay to have yoga in the church? And again, the answer is it depends. Some forms of yoga are just sort of fancy stretching. I think I haven't done it myself. Some of it, if it comes with a whole spiritual side, then just think about that. It can be helpful to have a whole hire policy, because then if you do want to say that you only want, for example, faith groups who are Christian or in sympathy with the Church of England, then you can point to that, and you're not sort of constantly having to think about whether this group should be allowed or whether that group shouldn't be allowed. So again, it won't be relevant for everybody, but perhaps church halls in more urban areas might think about that. James, any?
There is a difference. Everything Kevin has said, I endorse. There is a difference between the way an non-consecrated church hall is treated, owned by the PCC but held by the DBF, and the way a consecrated church building is treated. So in some cases, it's Charities Act. In some cases, that's the church hall side. It'll be Charities Act primarily. In the case of the church, it's primarily looking at whether you need a faculty to authorise whatever agreement you're doing, be it an agreement with another church, or be it an agreement with a secular body. And the whole principle of anything with a secular body on consecrated space needs to be authorised by faculty. But I think, any questions?
Thank you both. That's been really helpful. So any questions on this section for James and Kevin?
Or anything else that you think we should have covered?
Yeah.
You're here under false pretenses and thought we were supposed to be covering something else.
That's been an excellent session. I have to say, I really enjoyed it. It's been really interesting. Graham, are you waving your hand, or are you being? You need to unmute, and then I'll come to Helen. Yeah. Graham?
I've unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me or see me?
Yes,
or?
we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question with regard to glebe land, in that we used to have 44 acres, most of it in Essex, although we're a Suffolk church. We now have an inquiry from National Power, who would like to bury some power cables and probably GigaClear as well, who are putting internet cables. And they're asking the neighbours to the church, whose land it would also go across, who they need to contact to get permission from whoever is responsible for glebe land these days. Now, I've I looked through the list of people on the diocesan webpage with authority, and the people that I have picked out are apparently not the right people. So we'd like to just pass on the information to National Power, if we could, as to what they should do.
Glebe land, go to Dawn Gillett.
That's the person I got the neighbour to go to. And, well, to be frank, she didn't really get any help. So should we get National Power to write to her?
Are we talking about what was the glebe land in Essex, or are we talking about what is still glebe land adjacent to the church in Suffolk?
We're talking about the latter.
Okay, then either send it to me and I will convince Dawn that she needs to deal with it, or give National Power Dawn Gillett's details. But she is the officer in diocesan office who deals with glebe.
Yeah, she is. There's no doubt. That's an absolute cert, Graham. I'm sorry about I don't know why that would be the case, but if it's the Suffolk land, then it's Dawn.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that.
All right,
That's
not at all.
helpful.
Helen.
Hall. So,
Helen, sorry, we lost you. Could you? Yeah.
Is any better?
Yes, far away.
Church hall that has been done up by the parish council and is £1. The lease is coming up again very soon. So are you saying we shouldn't be leasing it to them for £1? Should we be looking for more money, or they do all the maintenance on it?
I think I'm aware of this one. Is it Boatsdale?
Bottersdale, yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm already involved with that.
Right.
So they do need permission, and it's coming through me. So I think everybody's doing the right thing.
Okay, great. As long as
that's the sort of answer you want to get, Helen. That's the sort of answer you want to get. That's great.
James is handling it. That's the answer.
Therefore, Kevin, we can all relax.
We can all relax.
Yeah. James and Kevin, I have found this absolutely fascinating. I mean, I've been an archdeacon 15 years, and I have learned plenty. I'm not going to tell you what I've learned tonight, but I've learned things that I thought I knew that I didn't. But I will tell Rich, of course, that I knew everything you said. But thank you very much. It's been a real joy and a huge privilege actually to have two such eminent registrars giving us a talk. And thank you for that. A real privilege. To all of you who've come, I can say thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the series.
And it's a shame more people didn't come because
Yeah, it is. It is. I was apologising for that at the beginning of the before others joined us, but well, that's their loss and it's our gain, and it is on the hub in perpetuity. But Nicola, I think you probably get the prize for having been at everything. So well done, and that's the sort of enthusiasm that we like to see. Yes, well done. So to all of you, wish you every blessing, and thank you very much. And I'm going to stop recording now, and in a moment I'm going to close down the website. So thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all.